Alright everybody, welcome back! So I know I said that we'd be doing a vehicle that got VR changes, but this one was heavily influenced by the VR changes, so I figured it was close enough. And when I heard that 11.7 was gaming again, I couldn't resist. I had to make this video. So before I get into what exactly changed and why the F-14 is playable again, I just wanted to say, you know I don't usually do this, but if you aren't already subscribed, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I'm trying to hit 15,000 subs, and only 20% of y'all are subscribed right now, so it'd mean the world to me if you were willing to do so. Now, getting back to what exactly is going on, so Gaijin dropped some VR changes today as of time of recording, and yesterday, when this video actually goes live, and that introduced a maximum battle rating of 12.7. Now, that may not sound like a big deal considering that the F-14A is still 11.7, and so it should still be able to fight 12.7s, and yes, in theory it can, but Gaijin does have something called quantitative matchmaking. And so what that means is if you are fighting a full BR above you, so in this case, right, if I'm fighting 12.7, I can only fight up to 4 12.7s on the enemy team. Now, there's no limit for 12.3s, which is why the F-15 staying at 12.3 for some stupid reason is such a problem, but at least in this case, I can fight no more than 4 R-73 slingers, and I have to be in a full up tier to fight those R-73 slingers in the first place, because the SE-27, the MiG-29G, and the MiG-29 SMT, all the competent airframes with the R-73, have all gone to 12.7. And I'm gonna be honest with y'all, I've only gotten 1 or 2 12.7 matches out of all the games I've played. Now, I haven't gotten a single 10.7 game, and if I had gotten one, that would have been incredible and I would have put in the video. But I got a ton of 12.0 and some 12.3 games, and you are still very viable, especially because you are on the American team, which means that most of the F-15s, as long as they don't get a mixed game, are going to be on your team. And even if not, if you're in an 11.3, 12.3 match, which is most of the time, you can only fight up to 4 of those 12.3 still. And this has made the F-14 very viable again, because this thing is competitive in 12.0 and 12.3. Now, will it win a dogfight against an F-16? No, of course not. The F-16 will absolutely trounce the F-14 in a dogfight. And that's not to say the F-14 is like unmaneuverable by any means. It's still a pretty agile aircraft. It's just the F-16 has such a UFO flight model that there's really not much you can do if it gets to a 1v1 dogfight. The thing is, most of the time that doesn't happen. Now, of course, you do get Phoenixes, however, I wouldn't recommend over-relying on them. I see a ton of people who are running 6 Phoenixes, firing them all off, and then running back to base. And sure, you might get some kills this way, but the Phoenix was not designed to be an anti-fighter missile. Sure, it can hit fighters, but it was designed to kill bombers. Bombers which we do not have in War Thunder. Now, of course, I am using Phoenixes because I find them incredibly fun to use, and you can get kills with them. I'm not saying you won't, but I just would not rely on them. They are not the most agile missile. They're not going to be getting most of your kills. I would recommend running no more than 2 if you're really trying to be competitive. 4 maybe at max, and that's the load that I normally run just because I find having 4 Phoenixes incredibly funny. But your Sparrows and AIM-9s are going to be the actually competent ways that you're going to get kills. Even though the Sparrow isn't nearly as good as it used to be, unfortunately. I'm not sure what they did, but it feels really bad. Now, this is going to be slightly unrelated, but I do really think guys need to work on their spotting system. Yeah, that F4E was 1.2 kilometers away behind me unspotted. Now, I know I wasn't looking at him, of course, but I still think he should have been spotted. Now, F-14-wise, I see a lot of people complaining about the radar and saying that it's incredibly easy to notch. Well, there's a very easy fix for that. You're able to switch from pulse Doppler to normal pulse mode while maintaining lock, just like it did right there, which let me continue locking that F-16 and guiding the Sparrow in, without having to worry about losing track. And you have a ton of people at top tier that aren't running chaff anymore, and even if they do run chaff, so long as they are flying towards you, you don't have to worry. Even if your radar locks on the chaff, the missile will continue guiding on the plane because the plane is in the radar beam. Now, unfortunately, there are a ton of F4S players, which means that you are most of the time going to end up fighting multiple enemies by yourself because your F4S players are all either bombing already and leaving you to fight by yourself, or they have been killed. I have found myself in a ton of 1vx situations while playing the F-14. It is what it is. Now, of course, like I said, even though the Phoenix isn't some godly missile and is not going to get you a ton of kills, if you still want to use it just because it's funny, or if you did get a full down to your 10.7 and you're fighting Drakons which have no RWR, man, I wish I had, there is a very easy way to use them. All you gotta do is go into TWS, fire at somebody without actually hard locking them, and you can use your switch target button whenever you have it set to. In my case, I have it at 6, and you can cycle between your targets and fire off multiple of different people. I would recommend getting up to the high altitude and at least Mach 1 before you actually go ahead and fire it. I usually like to try to get to at least 8 to 10 kilometers because the Phoenix is a very heavy missile and is very draggy as well. It also doesn't have great acceleration, so you want to give it as much speed as possible so it can actually maintain itself as it's traveling towards the target. If you're going super fast and super high, this thing will go well over 100 kilometers, but in actual cases, in War Thunder fighting fighters, I would recommend firing it at around 40 kilometers, as long as you're at that altitude and at that speed. That's close enough that it won't loft, but usually by the time it gets to the target, it will be burnt out, as long as you fire it at around 40 kilometers, and so that gives you a little bit of stealth advantage, especially if you're fighting those planes that don't have RWRs. Speaking of RWR, that was the most annoying thing for me when flying this aircraft. The RWR for 11.7 is like actually terrible. This has the original F-14 RWR from, when it went on its Vietnam cruise, and all it tells you is high, medium, or low. It also doesn't give you launch warning with a ton of aircraft, although luckily it does seem to give you launch warning for the MiG-23s, which a lot of other planes don't, because they don't pick up J-band, so I count your blessing where blessings are due, but it is incredibly annoying, especially if you're in clouds, which Gaijin insist on putting in these matches, because someone will launch at you and you'll have no idea that there's a Sparrow on the way. The F-14 also has incredibly hot engines, which is why the R-73 was so irritating to deal with. For those of y'all who don't know, the R-73 shrinks its secret head field of view down after you launch it. The A9M just turns it off whenever it sees flares, so it doesn't matter how hot your engines are, because it's going to turn its secret head off whenever it sees the flares. With the R-73 though, if you have hot engines spaced apart like this, it can be incredibly difficult to flare it, even at sometimes 2 or 3 kilometers, unlike other planes which can sometimes flare it at 1 kilometer. I've had cases where I fired a R-73 at an F-14 3 kilometer psi aspect and they could not flare it. Of course, now you don't really have to deal with that because almost all the time you're just going to be fighting 12.0s or maybe 12.3s. And even in those 12.3 lobbies, they still have AIM-9Ms, which are flareable by the F-14. I know a lot of people ask me about fuel load and stuff like that. Personally, I run 30 minutes of gas on the F-14. That is very lean. I run first stage a lot, but even then it still sometimes fails me. Like, I'm dogfighting this Kafir right now. I'm going to kill him, even without needing an afterburner. But unfortunately, I have no gas left. So this dogfight is going to cost me making it back to the base. And of course, I do still manage to get an ace, but it is something to consider. If you don't want to run out of fuel, you can always bring 60 minutes of gas. Just for me personally, I heavily prioritize my aircraft's flight performance. So weighing it down that much is just not an option. Either way, hope y'all enjoyed the video. What do you think of the BR changes? And I'll catch y'all next time. So, peace, y'all.